Do you want me to check every single thing manually? Fine. I hope you're not in a hurry. One of my first jobs after college was at a small company providing financial services. There were a ton of problems there, mostly because of my boss. I'll call her Cruella Devil because she was tall, unnaturally thin, with a sharp face, always in heels and designer clothes. Cruella was wildly incompetent and constantly screamed at people, blaming them for her own mistakes. She often went on long vacations abroad, bragging about the expensive gifts she gave her 20-year-old lover, all while complaining about how expensive it was to maintain us. She paid minimum wages, and nobody ever got a raise. People were fired for the slightest reason or even imaginary offenses. She also had favorites among the employees. A few of her minions could do whatever they wanted, while the rest of us were treated like serfs. Staff turnover was enormous. The atmosphere was so toxic that only either unlucky people who couldn't find another job or desperate folks like me who clung to any opportunity stayed. Most left as soon as they found something better. Essentially, the only reason the company hadn't collapsed was that Cruella appeared only once or twice a week. The rest of the time, we worked without her interference. She was just a caricature of a villain. Her terrible personality is impossible to exaggerate. Looking back, I can laugh about it, but at the time, her screaming from across the corridor terrified me. I was young, and it was my first job. When she yelled, I genuinely thought I had done something wrong or wasn't good enough. The work itself was boring and routine, but there was one critical task. When we received physical copies of contracts from clients, we had to scan them, upload the scans to our internal database, and then send the physical contracts to the head office. This was extremely important because if a contract got lost, a client might stop paying, costing the company $5,000 per lost contract. The head office took this very seriously and could even start an investigation. Of course, the company was disorganized and we constantly lost contracts. Everyone knew it, including me, a newbie, but no one dared mention it. Cruella was too clueless to notice. This couldn't continue forever. One Thursday morning, Cruella summoned me to her office and demanded that I check every contract in the database to see if anything had gone missing. The head office suspected discrepancies, and now she pretended that investigating it was my responsibility. It was complete nonsense. Checking the contracts was far beyond my duties and should never have been entrusted to a new employee. No one had ever told me I had to do this during my 2 months there. Still, I wanted to be a good employee, so I said I would do it immediately. She handed me a stack of printed sheets and said, "Here are the contract numbers for the last quarter. Check each one and write down all missing contracts." I looked at the stack. It was about 100 pages, each filled with long lists of contract numbers. There were thousands of contracts. I quickly calculated that manually checking the entire list would take me 4 to 5 days. Completing it in one day was impossible. When I tried to point this out, Cruella looked at me like I was an idiot and started screaming, "You just enter the number in the computer, then check the info. It takes no more than 10-20 seconds. Stop being lazy and get to work." She truly believed that if one contract took 10 seconds, 1,000 contracts could be checked in 10 minutes. How could I possibly expect her to understand basic math? By this point, I was fed up with her ridiculous demands, but I still tried to do my job properly. I was young and naive. The hour of malicious compliance had not yet come. I returned to my desk and tried to figure out a way to actually finish the task in one day. After calming down from all the yelling, I realized it was actually quite simple. Cruella wanted the contracts checked one by one because that was the only method she knew. Almost everyone in the office was terrible with computers, but I had access to the database and Google. After a few trials, I found an online guide and was able to run a query that instantly showed all missing contracts. I didn't even have to worry about accidentally skipping a line or typing a wrong number mistakes that would have been inevitable if I did it manually. It all took less than 2 hours. There were 22 missing contracts in total. Losing one would have been bad, 2 even worse, but 22. No comment. I even kind of enjoyed seeing just how badly Cruella had messed up. I printed out a list of the 22 missing contracts. Cruella didn't use email, so I went to her office. At first, she smirked triumphantly, saying, "See? I told you it wouldn't take long, you lazy fool." But then she saw the list, and her eyes nearly popped out of her head. She immediately started screaming that it was impossible and that I had made a mistake. I didn't flinch. Even if I didn't always believe in myself, I trusted the data. I manually checked all 22 contracts and was 100% certain they were actually missing. She yelled while I just shook my head, insisting these were accurate results from my query. I'm sure she didn't even know what a query was. All she understood was that I hadn't done what she ordered, checked each contract manually. Instead, I had produced the list through some kind of computer magic. She shouted that I wasn't authorized to hack her database and even hinted, without joking, that my degree might be fake. She threw a piece of paper at me and said my new task was to start over and do it properly. And that's when malicious compliance kicked in. I returned to my office and picked up Cruella's original multi-page contract list. Previously, I hadn't needed it because I could just filter the records by date, but now that was forbidden, no hacking the database. Everything had to be done properly. Very slowly, I typed in the first number, waited for the page to load, and carefully checked the contract. It was fine, so I ticked it off with a pencil next to the number, one down, several thousand to go. At this stage, Cruella basically paid me to listen to podcasts. Headphones were allowed while I performed a task that had already been completed, but in an incredibly slow and inefficient way. I had other responsibilities too, which I ignored because Cruella had declared this my only task. By lunchtime, I had completed maybe 3 or 4 pages. By mid-afternoon, Cruella started wondering why it was taking so long. Complaints began to trickle in that my regular tasks weren't being done. She came to my office, accusing me of doing nothing. I showed her the list I was working on and right before her eyes, deliberately typed in a contract number very slowly and ticked it off. I could see the gears turning in Cruella's head as she slowly realized she had assigned me an impossible task. She asked about my list of 22 missing contracts, and I told her that, as far as I understood, it was full of errors, so I had destroyed it and deleted the files from my computer. She started yelling that she was leaving for Ibiza that evening, and that I was too slow. I replied that I was being extremely careful because she had scolded me for mistakes before, and I wanted to make sure nothing like that happened again. Then she had a brilliant idea. She said I was too slow and stupid, so she would do the work herself. Of course, her method of doing the work herself involved calling each employee into her office one by one, giving them a couple of pages of contract numbers, and telling them to verify and record all the missing contracts. She refused to acknowledge that I had already proven the task impossible for one person in a single day. Instead, she decided that 30 people would do it in one day to teach me a lesson. She assigned me the lowest value, most menial task so she could compile her own list. She thought it was some kind of punishment for me, but I didn't care. I laughed at how she managed to tie up the entire office for 4 hours. Every time I handed someone their page, I said, seriously, be careful, don't rush. Miss Devil says it's very important not to make mistakes. Complete nonsense. She even got the secretary involved, leaving calls unanswered, and chaos reigned at reception. I felt sorry for the 2 or 3 competent people dragged into this, but the rest of the office was still idiots. By the end of the day, Cruella somehow managed to compile her list of missing contracts. She proudly showed it to me, claiming that only 19 contracts were missing, not counting the fact that she tried to spin it as a victory because it was 3 fewer than my list. Her list was wrong. I kept a copy of my own list and, out of curiosity, later compared it with Cruella's. She and the other employees correctly identified 18 missing contracts. 4 contracts were completely overlooked, and 1 contract she listed as missing hadn't actually been lost at all. This last mistake was particularly ridiculous because it meant nobody had bothered to double-check the list. Otherwise, that contract would have appeared in the database, and the error would have been obvious immediately. I didn't bother pointing that out to Cruella. She wasn't assigning me to check her work. At this point, a small smirk appeared on my face because I realized that the head office would soon discover not only how many contracts had gone missing, but also that Cruella had no idea how to check them. She was in deep trouble, but too dumb to realize it. Of course, the boss noticed my smirk and started yelling at me for it. Why are you laughing? You think it's funny that you wasted so much time? No, I replied, you're absolutely right, Miss Devil. It was completely possible to check all the contracts manually by tonight. Thank you for showing me that. Don't think you're so smart. Do you know how many people want your job? I could replace you very easily. In fact, there are plenty of qualified candidates more qualified than you. Wow, seems like you should have hired one of them instead of me. I can call any of them right now and they'd be ready to start tomorrow. Great idea. You probably should do that. I'm submitting my resignation. My last day will be next Wednesday. She froze, shocked. I never saw her again. She was supposed to be in Ibiza from Friday to Sunday, though I heard she extended her trip. I don't know if it was to avoid seeing me or dealing with head office questions about the missing contracts. My replacement arrived on Tuesday, but I didn't speak to him. The remaining days, I just sat in the office, watched YouTube videos, and on Wednesday, I walked out feeling like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had prepared myself for tough times. Quitting suddenly meant I didn't have another job lined up or good chances for a recommendation, but I got lucky. By the end of the month, I found a much better position. The funny part, I only wanted to collect my final paycheck and forget about Corella. But her deputy, Jasper, told me I would have to come in and sign some legal papers stating I wouldn't sue the company. Otherwise, they wouldn't release my money. I told him I wasn't planning to sue, just wanted what I was owed. He insisted I sign, claiming it was a legal requirement for my protection and that all former employees had to sign these documents. Eventually, I agreed to come in and I brought a lawyer. Jasper's face went instantly pale. I politely explained that, since he insisted over the phone, I wanted to make sure we signed everything correctly and avoided mistakes. The lawyer glanced over the documents, quoted a few laws, and said something like, "My client's contract is clear. He is not obligated to sign anything if he doesn't receive his paycheck by such and such date. We will sue for breach of contract if this isn't fulfilled." Unlike some people, I didn't lose my contract. The next day, I received my money. I never went back. Later, I heard Cruella's company went bankrupt. She had to ask relatives for help just to avoid being homeless. Comments often say, "I'm surprised you didn't send your exact list of missing contracts to head office right after she left." Author, honestly, I wasn't even tempted. As soon as head office started investigating, they would have quickly discovered the missing contracts themselves. Besides, I wasn't planning to continue in that field, I just wanted to leave that messy story behind as quickly as possible. So, as always, leave your thoughts in the comments about this story. My opinion? The author mostly did the right thing, but if it were me, I wouldn't have quit so abruptly. I would have kept working a little longer, at least until I found a new job, because searching for a good job can take a very long time. The story doesn't say whether he found a better job, a worse one, or even found one at all. But job hunting can take a lot of effort, sometimes longer than you think. So think carefully before making such bold moves.